Meet a local physician who worked hard to learn how to reduce stress in his life and now is passing that on to others. Coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at the Herald offices at Myrtle Square Mall. We're visiting with Dr. John Charles of Grand Strand Regional Medical Center. Good morning.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Thank you for coming in. Is it okay to call you John?
Oh, absolutely.
I think the last time we were together on Carolina People, John, was over at Coastal Carolina University, the Wall
Right.
School of Business. We were focused on the Heart Walk, I want to say.
Exactly. It was the Heart Walk was coming up, and we were getting into the details of how that worked.
That's exactly right. I think almost 10 years ago, you kicked off a show that lasted a little more than a year on this same station. At that time, it was WGSE.
Exactly.
TV 43. How'd you get into that, John?
Well, that was, that was originally started by Dr. Asbury Williams.
That's right.
And I don't know how he started that, but it was a live call-in talk show,
Right.
which is almost unheard of these days.
Oh, yeah.
And one day he had me as a guest, because he always had a physician guest to interview, and then the callers would call in and ask questions of that guest. And he and I had such a good time together on the show that a couple of weeks later he called me up and said, I really have been thinking about cutting back on doing the show every week, and would you fill in for me sometimes? And that came into to escalate to a half time. He and I would alternate.
Is that
weeks.
right?
Yeah.
Now, did you do that? That was weekly or nightly?
It was weekly.
Weekly.
Yeah,
You and your help.
You and your help.
I remember that's the first time I actually ever saw you, because at that time I had set up the company and was pursuing the purchase of the station.
Right.
Of course, you were there on a regular basis, as was Asbury.
Right. And I'll never forget the tape that rolled as the introduction was out of a pill factory. And there was about 30 seconds of all these pills flowing from one machine to another.
You are kidding.
And I'll always look at those pills and go, boy, I don't know if that's exactly my idea of health, but I guess it's what we're going to use.
That is, you took what was there before.
Right.
That is hilarious. John, are you from the area? Are you from here in Horry County or throughout the PD?
Well, in a sense, Greg. I was born in Florence. But within a year or two, my dad left town with the Air Force. He was an Air Force attorney, a JAG officer. And so we never returned to Florence. And it really is by virtue of some other connections and other reasons that I end up in the same part of the state.
That is fascinating. How long have you been at Grand Strand Regional Medical Center?
This summer, Greg, it'll be 15 years.
15.
Right.
Golly. So much of your adult life has been spent here in Horry County.
Right. And my parents, after my father retired from the Air Force, they moved here in 74.
Oh, boy.
So at that point, I had already left home and gone to college, but I've known this town since 74, and my father has lived here, and then he was solicitor for a period of time, and as you know, on city council. So I've kept up with the town for a long time.
Your dad was on city council.
Right. He was on city council for 12 years. It was the same 12 years that Bob Grissom was mayor. So he and Bob came on city council, and both Bob and my dad ran against Mark McBride for mayor, and Mark won that, and at that point both of them became uninvolved. But my dad was, I really think, was an important member of city council. He was an attorney. He wasn't the city attorney, but he was an attorney on city council and really did a lot of great background work on all the issues, and would come to the city council meetings with a lot of preparation that probably benefited the deliberations.
Absolutely. And what about him being a JAG officer? You all traveled a good bit to other Air Force institutions?
Right. When we left Florence, we went to Japan. Not Japan, but France. I learned to speak French as a French child would, Went to French preschool, nursery school, spoke French with all the French kids. And then moved back to America and refused to speak French and forgot it all within 6 months.
Am I correct that one of your girls went to France recently?
Right. My oldest, Julia, went to France for a period of summer before last.
That's right.
And learned some more French. She loves French. And then the family went over and joined her at the end of her stay there, and I embarrassed her because, boy, I slaughtered the language.
I'm sure.
And I loved doing it. I just, and the French people, they enjoyed my French. You know, they would smile and correct me. And,
oh, yeah, John.
You know, they knew I was trying. They gave me credit for that.
That's right. That's right. You know, I thought about your daughter going to France because I remember Ed, your father-in-law, Ed Young, being with us, golly, maybe about a year ago, and he was talking about the aspect of grandchildren and that idea, and he pushes it so well, that grandchildren. It's so true. But he talked about your daughter getting back from France and not wanting to necessarily hang out at the beach, but instead come hang out on the farm and bring her friends up.
Yeah, Ed, Ed is a fabulous grandfather, and my kids love going over to Florence and just hanging out on the farm and being with their grandparents.
You're right, and your son as well. I think Ed talks about...
and probably my son more than any others, because he goes and gets the shotgun and runs around in the fields looking for something to shoot, something legal to shoot.
Oh my God. That must be very special, I'm sure, for all of y'all. And so I guess your wife has got the Florence ties as well.
Right. Harriet grew up in Florence, on the outside of Florence, in Ebenezer, and her dad was state legislator for a while and House of Representatives in Washington for a term. So he's a well-known guy over there, and a good guy.
Does your father and her father ever get together? Both those guys have fascinating backgrounds, so they spend much time together?
Only when there's a family get-together, several times a year, but whenever we do get together, they're always off in the corner, huddled and talking politics.
Right.
Because both of them love to talk politics.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. John, let's talk about that experience. You went to school in South Carolina and then later were in, am I correct, in D.C. for both college and then medical school?
Well, when it came time to go to college, I went over to University of South Carolina.
Right.
And after that, spent a couple of years trying to decide what I wanted to do. And when it came time to get into medical school, I had to go back to school part-time and get all my pre-med credits because I had not been a pre-med student. At that time, Harriet was in graduate school in Washington, so it was natural that I be up there. We were married, and when it came time to get into medical school, she had already gotten a real good job in her field, speech pathology, and so we decided to stay there for medical school. So I went to George Washington.
I know what it was. It was residency. You also followed up there.
Right, and did residency there as well, in emergency medicine.
In emergency medicine?
Right, yeah.
Let's talk about emergency medicine, John. That's a big deal. And you're a pretty even-keeled guy. It seems like you'd have to be pretty dang stressed a lot to be in emergency medicine, but maybe not. Do you have to be even-keeled?
I think you have to. Emergency medicine is a continual set of stressors that are being thrown at you the whole time. And if you're the kind of person who is going to react to every stressor, then you're not going to be very happy in emergency medicine. But interestingly, being in that situation led me to pursue the field of research into stress, and I ended up, that was became kind of a sideline with me, where I became certified in mind-body medicine and taught mind-body medicine, and all of that had to do with teaching myself how to better handle the stress of the emergency room.
That's fascinating. Well, that was a great way to think. So it's the research of stress that helped open the door to getting focused on mind-body medicine.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I looked into ways that I could handle my own stress well, and was not really thinking about teaching it to people. And then something came in the mail that said, use this to help your patients. And so I went to a course and took another course and one thing led to another. And it's a fascinating
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Before we talk more about mind-body medicine, I want to learn a little bit about that. I'm sure viewers are interested in that. What about this current position you're in, John? Am I correct? It's Director for Medical Affairs?
Right. Director for Medical Affairs.
What is that?
Great question.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can.
We've got to segue into another.
Let's see if we can cobble together an answer for that. It is I'm the only person administratively who works for the hospital who's a doctor.
Okay.
I'm not in charge of the doctors. They don't work for the hospital. They use the hospital. They don't work for me. However, there's a whole lot of interaction that goes on between the doctors and the hospital as a 1,000-employee facility.
Sure.
And there's a lot of times where the communication just doesn't flow right. Doctors are... we think a certain way, and we expect other people to think like us. So what I do is I'm the interface between the physicians and the hospital. Now, it's more than just being a liaison. When it comes time to see if the hospital is adhering to the thousands of government regulations, I'm brought into that process, and they say, Dr. Charles, how can we adhere to these regulations and still give good practice? When it comes time to the things about medical staff governance, where we have to decide which doctors are qualified enough to practice and which aren't, then they come to me again and say, okay, help us go through this process of figuring that out. In terms of efficiency, the healthcare dollar is shrinking, and we do more with less resources every year. And again, they come to me and say, how can we provide the same level of care when we're being paid 10% less than we were last year? How can we do that? And again, you sort of bring in the doctor's mind and the business mind that I'm picking up from the other side, and help out with that.
Sounds like there's a heck of a lot of healthcare heroes here in the area that are obviously, with shrinking budgets, as you say, being able to serve it. How do doctors go about governing themselves? When you talk about that idea of doctors essentially within their own group deciding who can and can't practice, that's a big deal.
Oh, it's a huge deal, and of course it extends into the legal aspects of antitrust. So physicians can claim that, well, if you don't let me practice in your hospital, then it's a breach of trade, or preventing me from doing my profession. So there are a standard set of rules that are accepted by everyone, and believe it or not, much of it has come from the federal government, that says physicians can govern themselves according to these parameters, and if they do these things, then they can't be they can't be accused of excluding someone from their little club. But by the same token, it's very clear to the government, to the patients, to the people who own the hospital, that the quality of what goes on in that hospital is up to the physicians. And so although the physicians don't own the hospital, they don't work for the hospital, but we are the arbiters of the quality of what goes on in the hospital. So we are part of monitoring when every month several committees will get together at different times, and cases that look a little bit odd. Perhaps someone was discharged on Thursday and had to come back in on Saturday, or someone who was admitted to the regular ward and ended up having to go to the ICU unexpectedly. Things like this we look at, and we say, okay, what is it about this case that made this unusual event happen? Was there something in the way that we practice medicine? At one time, all of that was thought to be very punitive and onerous towards doctors, because the whole idea was, well, you're out to get us. You're out to nail me for practicing bad medicine. But as it turns out, it's rarely that's the problem. It's usually a system problem, a process problem. And so these committees, and I do most of the looking in these committees, is to sit back and look at the entire process and say, where did things go off that they didn't go as planned? Was there anything that we could have done about it? Or was this patient just so sick that it was inevitable? And there are plenty of times when something goes wrong and or a patient dies unexpectedly, and you look very hard at it and you say, I think we did everything right. But there are other times when we say, I think if we'd have done this at this point and this at this point, then we may have turned things around.
You talk about one position there. I think earlier you said the quality of what goes on in the hospital is up to the doctors.
Right.
And oftentimes, obviously, when we think about finger pointing, when you think of the young woman at Duke, Jessica Santilli,
right. Right.
Are the doctors at blame, or is the medical institution itself at blame? Who is the finger pointing? And oftentimes, I guess if there's a problem, we don't think, I think on the outside that the doctors are to blame, but instead probably not HCA in that instance or Conway Medical Center or otherwise. But that must be a huge burden on you all, John, as well as a huge burden on the hospital, because they want to take the credit as well as recognize oftentimes they have to take the blame.
Right. And I think, Greg, that an important thing we're trying to do is eliminate the term blame from our terminology here.
Yeah.
And no, don't apologize, because that's what everyone. And even the doctors are still feeling that there's a blame issue here. The event that occurred at Duke, that physician, that surgeon, raised his hand and said, "I take responsibility," and that's what all doctors do, because my name is on the chart. I'm the one who's nominally in charge, and that's that. Now, having said that, should we just simply say, okay, he did it, we punish him, and then everything's taken care of? No, that would be silly, because the fact of the matter is you had to go through a dozen steps to get that transplanted lung tissue from the donor to the processing lab, onto the helicopter or wherever it went, into Duke University, and into the operating room. And at every single one of those steps, it could have been caught. And so it may be convenient and perhaps valiant for that doctor to say, I'm to blame, but it doesn't do the next 10 years worth of patients any good unless you step back and look at the process. And you say, if the doctor wants to take the blame, fine and dandy, we understand that. But let's make sure it doesn't happen again. And that involves looking at the entire process. And that's where we're finding out when we take statistical analyses of looking into these processes, that it is very infrequent that even though the doctor may say, I'm taking responsibility, mea culpa, it's infrequent that there's not something else going on down the road. Just like a pilot of an airliner that crashes might say, well, it's all my fault. But the aviation industry knows a lot about looking at these things, and they go back in and they say, okay, what went wrong and where? And as it turns out, there's plenty of opportunities in the process that things could have been fixed, and it wouldn't do anybody any good unless you looked at it.
Now, this director for medical affairs, is that a position just within the HCA healthcare family? Is that something that many institutions are bringing in? Would Conway Medical Center, or Georgetown, or Loras, or Carolinas have something similar?
Yeah, lots of hospitals have them. It really depends upon the size and the level of activity. Grand Strand did not have one up until I'm the first one. And we had reached a point where the CEO, Doug White, said, I think we've reached a point in terms of the complexity of what we do, the sophistication of what we do, that we need to go ahead and have someone to do this job. Does HCA have them on all our hospitals? No. But plenty of other hospitals that are our size or larger have that kind of job.
Well, I want to jump into mind-body medicine, but of course that position was opened up, and I saw, going back 10 years, John, president of the Horry County Medical Society, chairman of the Department of Medicine there at Grand Strand, obviously vice chief of staff, and then later chief of staff before taking on this position. You've had a lot of experience within not only the medical community in Horry County, throughout the area, as well as in the hospital, to position you to really do this well in representing the other doctors.
Right. And you know, I think that when someone is in Doug White's position, the CEO, and he is looking to create this new job Probably the one qualification that helps the best is to hire a physician who is known to the staff and we're already friendly.
Right.
To bring somebody in from the outside and put in my position is already creating hurdles. Now, after I've been there for 5 years, and if for some reason I left, it would be easier to bring in somebody from the outside. But those were that was the background that made it easy for Doug to say, I think John Charles would work well with this.
And now's the time.
Right.
7 minutes left, John. I want to think that study into stress and obviously being an emergency room physician helped open up the door into, as you said, mind-body medicine.
Right.
What is mind-body medicine?
Right. Well, Greg, that's almost like asking me what is a director for medical affairs.
Another big one. That's right.
It's a pretty broad.
Do the pills running down the conveyor belt tie into mind-body medicine?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Yeah. I ultimately, mind-body medicine is about the concept that, in theory, we don't split off what goes on from here up and then what goes on down here. That things that are going on in our body are affected by our thoughts, and things that are going on in our body do affect our thoughts. There are lots of different variations on mind-body medicine, but in my mind, it really does boil down to the stress response. It's been shown over and over and over again, the stress response with adrenaline going and heart rate going up and, cortisol being produced and put out, things that keep us going, that kind of fight or flight response, have an enormous impact on our health, on our immune system, on whether we develop cholesterol plaques in our arteries, and how we feel. And what I've found over and over again in the workshops that I conduct is if someone is willing to learn how to decrease that stress response, and you can do it, anybody can do it, it just takes practice. Just like playing piano or playing basketball, it just takes practice. That it may not cure their diabetes, it may not cure their high blood pressure, but it sure does get it under control.
It takes practice to decrease their stress response.
Correct. And it's a matter of practicing various exercises. Some people like to use breathing exercises. Some use meditation. There's all kind of different things you can do. The important thing is that you set up a practice and stay with it.
Well, we're talking about medicine, and we're talking about, obviously, you're an MD. That's a medical degree or medical doctor. Which year in med school did you take your mind-body medicine class?
What year was that? You don't see it. You might have gotten one lunchtime lecture by someone who was brought in to do that.
Right.
But it is not at all part of our training. And, it's... one would hope that things are evolving.
Yeah, are evolving, yes.
But right now, medicine is very, very empiric. It's very molecular. It's very mechanical. This molecule goes here, does this. In order to change what's going on, we change the molecule with some medicine, or else we take out the organ that's not working right. And you know what? That is wonderful. We've done, in the last 50 years, 70 years, we've done fabulous things. We've saved lives. We save lives we could never save before. We can do lots of things, and it would be wrong for someone who's enthusiastic about mind-body medicine to denigrate that. However, once you set aside all those wonderful medical and technological things we do, there's still a lot of people who aren't feeling right. And it's those folks who aren't feeling right that I'm convinced that learning to deal with the stress response is going to make you feel healthy and well.
As a father, does an 11-year-old or 15-year-old or an 18-year-old say, I want to be like Daddy, I want to be a doctor? How does that happen, John? I mean, what's it like being a physician, and particularly one that was in an emergency room and has obviously seen things? Did you ever talk to your kids about, here was a motorcyclist during Bike Week who lost their head?
Yeah, my kids have always been curious. In fact, for a while there, my son would ask, "What's the worst thing you saw today?" They want, sort of the morbid curiosity.
Yeah.
But when you come home from work, it's hard to leave all that behind.
Yeah.
So you come home, and obviously you don't talk about a patient's name or that kind of thing,
Right.
but you say, I saw the saddest case today. Somebody drown or something like that, and so they have a fairly good feeling for what it's about. However, I think that when they are adults, when they're in their 30s or 40s, and if you ask them, what is the most predominant memory you have of your dad working in the emergency room, I think that their response will be, well, he was gone all the time. And when he was home, he was asleep. Because of the disruption, the night shifts, and sleeping during the day. I think that's what they'll remember the most.
Well, it seems like mind-body medicine, we got less than 2 minutes, John. It seems like mind-body medicine is something that all emergency room physicians or all physicians within the hospital need. Is it
Right.
infectious? Is it
Right.
something that they've gotten excited about? I mean, you represent them, essentially going back and
Right.
forth. Has that been infectious within the hospital?
No. and clearly I have fantasized teaching mind-body medicine to the National Association of Emergency Physicians convention and stuff like that, and there are probably lots of other docs like me who have the same thoughts, and the idea of mind-body medicine resonates wonderfully with virtually every doctor I work with at Grand Strand. However, the limitation is I just can't take the time to do it.
If you weren't the director of medical affairs at Grand Strand Regional, John, what do you think you'd be doing?
I think that I would be back in the ER. I loved patient care. I still do this a couple times a month in the ER. There was a lot to be said for the feeling that I got from helping people and being the one to help them and talking with them and things like that. My body was wearing out prematurely with that schedule, and I suspect that I would be looking for some way to mitigate the physical stress of that. But patient care was good.
Patient care was good, helping save lives, helping doctors govern themselves. 10 years ago, hosting a live talk show, maintaining some level of even keel aspect of life, and obviously researching stress and helping that go into mind-body medicine. It sure opened some wonderful doors. Dr. John Charles, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
It was a real pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Stay tuned to more Carolina People coming up next. We want to thank Dr. John Charles and all the staff and medical professionals at Grand Strand Regional Medical Center for making today's Carolina People so special.